Shalom, brothers and sisters. In this video, we're going to demonstrate some examples of prefixes being affixed to the beginning of Hebrew words. If you look here on your screen, you see one like example. When we look at this word in its fullness, we see that this Hebrew word is pronounced Wayadabar. Wayadabar. Now, what we want to highlight and demonstrate is the fact that you have two prefixes affixed to the beginning of this word. So we have our word, our foundation, which is the bar, which translates to word, thing, matter, along with a few other terms. And then you have the two prefixes, wa, which means and, ya, which means he. And when they are affixed to the beginning of the bar, it gives us the Hebrew word wayadabar, which means and he spoke. Now we're going to move on to a few more examples, and then we'll try to provide some biblical examples of some of these words that we're showing you with the prefix along with the root word. But moving on to our next example, we have the Hebrew word bamayam. Okay, bamayam. Okay, bamayam, which contains the prefix ba, which means in, and we have our foundation, okay, our word mayam, which means waters or the waters. Bamayam, obviously, as we can see, means in the waters. We know that this prefix ba can be translated as in, on, with, or by, but in this case, we're going to translate this as in the waters. And again, we're going to try to show you a scriptural example as well. Again, we're using the prefix ba, which means in, and we're prefixing this to the beginning of the word shemayim. Okay, ba meaning in, and then we have the Hebrew word shemayim, which means heaven, or sometimes it's translated plurally as heavens. So this gives us the Hebrew word ba shemayim, which means in the heavens. And for one more example, we're using the prefix ba, and we're prefixing this to the beginning of the word aratazah. Now, the Hebrew word aratazah can be translated as land or earth, but in this case, we're translating this as earth. So we have ba, which means in, prefixing this to the beginning of aratazah, giving us the Hebrew word ba aratazah, meaning in the earth. Next, we have the prefix ma, which means from. And then we have the word, again, aratazah, which we know means earth or land, but in this case, we're translating this as land. Ma, prefix to the beginning of aratazah, gives us the Hebrew word ma aratazah, which means from the land. Next, we have the prefix tha, which means you shall. We know it translates to a few other things, but in this case, we're going to translate it as you shall. Now, in the Hebrew Bible, we're going to go to a chapter in the Hebrew Bible to show you how this prefix is translated. In Exodus 20, we're going to show you how this prefix tha is translated as thou shalt. Right? Now, here we have a Hebrew word, aisha, which means to make. This word can be translated also as do. It can also be translated, I believe, act, A-C-T. And it can also be translated as to make or create. Now, in this case, this word is being translated as make. So we have the prefix tha plus Aisha, giving us the Hebrew word tha Aisha, which means you shall make. Okay? Last but not least, we have one example using the prefix wa, which means and. And we have this prefix to the beginning of the Hebrew word la'ah, which means no or not. When we prefix wa to the beginning of la'ah, this gives us the Hebrew word wala'ah, which means and not. All right, so now we're going to go to a Bible. We're going to open up a Bible program, and we are going to open to the book of Exodus, the 20th chapter. Okay, so this is Exodus chapter 20. This is using the Olive Bible program. You can get this Bible program for Mac, PC, as well as your cell phone, whether that be Android or an Apple cell phone. A very good Bible program. Okay, and within this Bible program, they have the Hebrew Bible, in specific, the Hebrew Westminster Leningrad Codex. Okay, so we're going to go through this. We're going to glean through this and see if we can find some of those examples that we just aforementioned, as well as some other examples within Exodus 20. Now, we're not going to get every single example of a prefix being prefixed at the beginning of a root. If we do that, we'll be here all day, right? Because there's plenty of examples. Some of you who may have studied your prefixes, automatically, just looking at this screen, you see a plethora of examples. Okay, but we're going to go through, starting here. This is Exodus 20, verse number 1. And as you can see, the first word within Exodus 20 and 1 is Wayadabar. Wayadabar meaning and he spoke, or and he spake. Now the he, we know that the word he is signified by this prefix, Yah. Okay? Now the he that is speaking, or that spoke, is identified in the next word. The next word being Alahayim. So when it says Wayadabar and he spoke, or and he spake, the he is referring to the Alahayim, or the Most High. So this will be translated as and God spake, or and God spoke. Wayadabar Alahayim, or in English, and God spake. Here we see another example of a prefix. We see the prefix ha being translated to the beginning of the word debarium. Now here you have the word debar, which again is the same word you see here. Okay, the only difference is that in this case, the first word wayadabar, debar is being translated as spoke or spake. Okay, here debar is being translated as word. When we get into suffixes, we'll delve into the translation of the suffix yum. Many of you know the meaning of the suffix already. The suffix yum signifies plurality. So it changes this word debar, which is singular, to debarium, plural. Okay? Debar by itself means a word. Again, I mentioned earlier, it means a word, a thing, or a matter. In this case, it's being translated as a word. By the yum being added to the end, it makes it debarium, or words, plural. And then we have the prefix ha, which means the. Here we have another example of the prefix ha, which means the. This is being translated to the beginning of this word, Allah, which this word, ha'Allah, literally means the these, okay? And that's how it's this word is translated in English as these, okay? But literally the translation is the this or the these, right? But it's translated in Exodus 20:1 as these. Okay. Next you have the word la amar. Here we have the prefix la, which means to or for, and it's being prefixed to the beginning of the word amar, which means to say or to speak. We covered this in week 5 of the Academy, Sunday's lesson, where we showed you this word la amar literally translates to saying. Okay, saying. Okay. So let's jump down. Let's see if we can find some more examples. We have examples again all throughout this chapter, but we're gonna glean and get a few. Okay. So here's an example that we showed you in the document. Okay. Here we have the prefix ma, which means from, being prefixed to the beginning of the word arataza. Now, arataza is usually translated as earth, okay, but it can also be translated as land. In this case, is being translated as land. And this is identifying a specific land. We're going to show you what land it's identifying. But ma'arataza in Exodus 20:2 is being translated as from the land. Now you'll notice that I'll identify specifically the way that a word is translated within a specific chapter and verse. Okay, I'm going to say that again. You'll notice that I'll say specifically how a particular word is translated within a specific chapter and verse, because this same word or this same prefix root combination that's translated as from the land in Exodus 20:2 can be translated differently in another chapter or verse. It will be the same word, the same root, but it'll be translated differently. In this case, it's translated as from the land. Somewhere else it could be from the earth. Okay, so the Hebrew is very flexible. Okay, in the sense that I believe I discussed this earlier in the Academy or in one of these videos, that one word can be translated in many different ways in Hebrew. Okay, so the language is very flexible. All right. Now, the point I wanted to get to is that this word, ma'arataza, which is translated in Exodus 20:2, from the land, is identifying a specific land. And the land that it's referring to is identified in the next word. The next word being Matazarium, okay, or Mitzrayim, which is the Hebrew word for Egypt. Okay, so this full statement is from the land of Egypt. Here we see another example of the ma prefix, ma meaning from. Then you have the Hebrew word. Now, the words are a little spaced out here, okay? Hopefully you can overlook that, but this is the Hebrew word bayath, which means house. So ma bayath means from the house. And here it has the word. Again, the words are a little spaced. There's, some places there's some spaces in between the words. But this word is ibad. Ibad meaning to serve as a verb. And as a noun, it means servant or slave or bondman. Okay? And then it has the suffix yum, which again signifies plurality. So this is the Hebrew word ibadyum, which means servants, plural, or in this case is translated as bondage. Okay? Mabayath, from the house of ibadyum, bondage. Again, ibadyum can be ibad can be translated as servant, as slave. Ibadyum can be translated as servants, plural, or slaves, plural. But again, in Exodus 20 and 2, as well as in other places, this word is being translated as bondage. Okay? So moving on to some more examples. Here's another example jumping down to verse 4 that you find within your document. Or not your document. This is a document that I kind of created on the fly just for the presentation of this video. All right. This word here is Tha Aisha. This is in the document we displayed earlier. Okay. Here we have the prefix tha, which means you shall. And then you have the Hebrew word Aisha, which means to make. Okay. So Tha Aisha means you shall make. Now, before Tha Aisha, which means you shall make, you see the Hebrew word la'ah. Okay? Now, the Hebrew word la'ah, we know, many of us know, means no or not. Okay? So this word la'ah negates this word Tha Aisha. This word Tha Aisha, again, means you shall make. But because we have this word la'ah at the beginning, it now changes from you shall make to you shall not make. So it negates this, turns this into a negative, making it you shall not make, or as it is in King James Version, English, thou shalt not make. Okay? Thou shalt is signified by the prefix tha. The word not is signified by the word la'ah, and make is signified by the Hebrew word Aisha. Okay? Here we see the example we showed you earlier, Ba Shemayim. We have Ba, which means in. Shemayim means heaven. Okay? So Ba Shemayim means in the heavens. Here we have Ba Aratazah. Now this is another version or another example of a prefix, but as well as this here, but we're not going to highlight every single example. Okay, just some very key examples, especially the ones we showed you in the document. So we have Ba, which means in. Aratazah, meaning in this case earth. So Ba Aratazah in this case is translated as in the earth. Here we have Ma Thakath. Okay, we have the Hebrew word ma, which means from. Thakath, meaning under. Okay, so Ma Thakath, meaning from under. Here we have again the Ba prefix, meaning in, being prefixed to the beginning of the word mayam, which means waters. Okay, so it says here, Ba mayam, in the waters. Here again we see the word mathakath, meaning from under. And here we have the word la aratazah. Now we know the prefix la means two or four, but in this case, la is being translated as the. Okay, so la aratazah in this case is translated as the earth. Now there are other examples where la is translated as the. One like example, I'll go to it real quick. In the book of Genesis, the first chapter. We go to Genesis, the first chapter, we see this word here, la awar. La awar literally means to the light or for the light, but again, la in this case is being translated as the. So the light. Okay, so it says, Wayakara, and he called. So again, we see the two prefix combination of wa and ya, he. Korah, meaning to call. So Wayakara, and he called. The he is identified in the next word. The next word being Alahayim. So this would be translated as, and God called. Okay, and God called. The next word here, La Awar, the light, Yawam, day. And God called the light day. Here we see two prefix combination with wa, meaning and. La, again, la literally means two or four, but again in this case, it's being translated as the. So this is, and the darkness. Okay, so like if I said chashak means light, I'm sorry, chashak means darkness. Okay, wala chashak, and the darkness, korah, he called, layala, night. Okay, so here we see another example of la being translated as the. Let me make sure it's in the shot. When you see that word there, Lara Kwaya, la meaning, well, again, la meaning two or four, but in this case being translated as the. Rakwaya meaning firmament. Okay? So there are cases where la is translated as the. So what we see in Exodus 20 is not out of the norm. All right, so let's go back to Exodus 20. Let's glean a few more examples, and then after that we are going to do another exercise where we actually try to write out some of these examples. So let's go back to Exodus 20. Let's go up here. All right, we'll glean maybe two more examples and then we'll conclude here. Okay. If you can see here on your screen, I'm going to highlight this word. Okay, that word that I just highlighted is la alapium, which means 2,000s. So in this case, la is being translated as two. Then you have the Hebrew word alap, which means 1,000. The suffix yum makes that plural, changing it from thousand to thousands. Okay, so la alapium means 2,000s. And let's see here, one more example. Jumping down, this word is already highlighted. You see this word, this prefix ha, which means the. And then you see the word Shabbat, which means Sabbath. Okay? So ha Shabbat, meaning the Sabbath. And right before it, you see this word Yawam, which means day. Okay? So Yawam ha Shabbat will be translated as the Sabbath day. All right? So here you see another example of a prefix, la, meaning two. Kodash means to, as a verb, meaning to be holy, to sanctify, to separate. In this case, is being translated as hallowed. Okay, and then we have the suffix wa, which we'll cover in our suffixes lesson. This suffix wa means it. Okay, it can be translated as he, and it can also be translated as it. So la kodashwa, meaning to hallow it. So if you were to start here, zakawar, remember. We have here the word oth, which symbolizes a direct object. Basically, if the easiest way to explain it is, it basically comes before the noun that's being modified, or the thing that is on the receiving end of an action. Okay, so you have your action, okay, remembering. You have your direct object, your direct verb object, oth, and then you have that which is on the receiving end of the action, What's on the receiving end of the action? Yom HaShabbat. So what's being remembered? Yom HaShabbat, the Sabbath day. La Kodashwa, to hallow it. Okay? Now, there are plenty of examples, and I would implore you to go and glean for yourself to see how many of these prefixes you can find. I mean, just looking at this chapter here, I'm seeing, wow, tens, if not hundreds, of examples of prefixes. I may be exaggerating with hundreds, but there are dozens of prefixes throughout this chapter that you can highlight. The reason why I'm not going over all of them, because many of them are just recycled prefixes that we've covered. Like, again, here we see la, okay, meaning 204. Here we see wa, which means and. Again, wa, which means and. Wa, which means and. So a lot of these are recycled. Wa, and. Okay, ba, en. All right, so you see this all throughout, ha, the. You'll see this all throughout Scripture. Okay, which is a good thing because the fact that a lot of these prefixes are recycled and reused so often through repetition and actually reading it, even though if you're not fluent, just the fact that you can highlight or identify the prefixes themselves will help you actually learn and retain some of these prefixes. And then through time, you'll start to make the comparison between the actual prefix, as we did with la. We showed you examples of la being naturally, it's 204, but there are cases where it's translated as the. So you'll start to pick up on those nuances once you do the comparison between this and the KJV. Also, believe it or not, when you start getting into reading the Hebrew, you'll get to a point where you'll start looking at other translations. You'll start looking at the NIV. You'll start looking at the ESV to see how they translated some of these words. Okay? So you'll find yourself doing translation comparisons based on what's in the Hebrew and how these other translations are translated. Okay? Not necessarily from a standpoint of wanting to necessarily move over to making the ESV or the NIV your Bible of choice. But again, as you start to get into the languages, whether it's Hebrew or Greek or the original languages, you can't help but get intrigued with how it was how certain words were translated in the KJV, and how some of the other translations, some of the words that they used in their translations. But that'll come much later through time, and I guess you would say dedication and appreciation for the original languages of the Bible. Okay. So with that, we're going to go to our last little portion here. What we're going to do, we'll just see if we can create a new page in Windows. Let's go back to or Microsoft Word. Let's go back to Microsoft Word very quickly. And we are going to see if we can create. Let's add a page here. We're going to see if we can draw some of these out. All right. So we have a blank page here. So we have our blank page, and we are going to draw some examples, or we're going to write out some examples real time of those same prefixes and root word combinations that we showed you earlier. So let's see here. I'm going to start off with our root word, starting off with the example. Let me make sure you all can see this. Okay, we're going to make this just a little bit thinner. Just a little bit thinner. Okay. Go here. So we're going to start off with the bar. Okay. Now, if you notice, I've mentioned this in past academies, but if you notice, penmanship is not necessarily the best, but obviously, or hopefully, you all can recognize what we're writing here. Okay. Hopefully, it's enough. Maybe, hopefully, it's legible enough so that you can follow along. Okay. So this is our root word dabar, which means, again, this word means word or thing or matter, but in this case, it's being used to denote the act of speaking. Okay, so in this case, it's translated in Exodus 20:1 as spake. Okay, and God spake. Okay, so we're going to add our two prefixes at the end or at the beginning, Salakia. We're going to add two prefixes at the end. I keep saying the end, I mean the beginning. Okay, because pre signifies before. I want you all to remember that, because when we deal with suffixes, we know that suffixes are added to the end of words. So I don't want you all to get confused when we get into that. Okay, so let's see here. We're going to add our first prefix, which is, let's first erase that little dot. We're going to add our first prefix, which is wa, which means and ya, which means he. Okay, so these are little exercises you can actually do on your own, just for your own study, your own practice. Now, naturally, I want to highlight this. Naturally, when you're writing this out, of course, you're going to write your prefixes first because you're writing from right to left. And I'm going to demonstrate that. Okay, but before I do so, I just want to make sure I explain this, that the only reason why we're writing out the root word first is to show you the root word, or whatever word may be present. We want to show you how that word initially is before the prefixes are added, and then we add our prefixes later to show you how the word changes once those prefixes are added to the word. Okay, so for example, with this one, the bar by itself means to a word, a thing, or matter. But based on the fact that we have these two prefixes, and he, which is or ya, which is a verb prefix, right? It changes this to spake. Okay, so we're showing you how a word, again, how a word stands by itself, but how prefixes now begin to change the meaning of a word. Not fully to the point where, it has no connection with its root, but it now causes the word to go into a variant, okay, a change. The same thing goes for when suffixes are added. When suffixes are added, it can now change a singular into a plural. It can change a masculine into a feminine, so on and so forth. Okay, so that's the beauty of the prefixes and the suffixes. Now we're going to move on to, before we move on, let me just show you how you would naturally write this out. Okay, so when you guys write out your words, I don't want you to start off with the root word first. Obviously, you're going to start off with your prefix. So naturally, if you were to just write this out, you would write it out with your prefixes first at the beginning of the word, and then you would work your way through the word. Okay, but again, we're writing out the word first and then adding the prefixes afterwards to show you the changes that take place once the prefixes are added. So now moving on. Okay. Moving on. Let's get just two more examples. We don't have to overstress this. We already showed you the document form. We showed you some of those same examples in the Bible itself. So now we're going to move on to just a few more of these examples. You can complete this on your own when you get the opportunity. Okay, just to kind of challenge yourself and keep this at the forefront of your mind as you go forward, and making sure that you retain this, because again, in the coming weeks, we're going to be building upon this information moving into suffixes, which is, it's going to take time for your mind to get trained to move into that realm. So whatever you can do really to keep these things at the forefront of your mind and retain it, the better, right? So let's see here. So we're going to start off with the word Bayath. Bayath, which means house. Noun, we are going to add the prefix ma, which means from. Ma means from. So now, and I believe this is actually in your document from this past week or from week 5. Okay, so we have ma, which means from. We have house, which in this case, this is going to be changed from simply house to the house. Okay, so from the house. This should be black. I'll just go over this here because it's part of the root word. All right, just right over that. So from the house. Okay. Moving on to just one more example. All right, one more example. So we're going to write out Arataza. Okay, Arataza, which means earth. Okay, let me write that again so you can see it. Okay, Arataza. And we're going to add the prefix ba, which means N. Okay, let me write that again. I'd like you all to be able to see what's going on before you. Okay, for some of you that are maybe having trouble writing some of these out, this may help. Okay, so this is the letter ba, which means N. Okay, and again, Arataza means earth. Okay, so this is going to be translated as in the earth. Okay, in the earth. Now, it took up a lot of space, so you're not going to be able to see all of it at once. Okay, let me just scroll up. Okay, Ba'arataza, in the earth. All right. So hopefully this video provided you some more insight, some more clarification, using some examples from starting off from our document, moving on to the actual Bible, and then showing you through illustration as far as writing them out. When it comes to the prefixes and how they're prefixed at the beginning of roots, I pray that this information again is very helpful, and I would like your feedback to know if these videos are actually helping you move forward. From academy to academy, I get suggestions or requests for further teachings on the Hebrew throughout the course of the week. So this, I guess, is the beginning of, or at least something we can do in the meantime to make sure that at the end of the academy you're a little bit more comfortable with your Hebrew studies. So with that, I I say bless you all and shalom.